Scream Street, Book 1, Fang of the Vampire, by Tommy Donbavand. Chapter 1, The Chase. The schoolboy leaped over the wall into the graveyard, his feet skidding on wet grass. Barely managing to keep his balance, he ran on, dodging between headstones that jutted from the ground like rotten teeth. Behind him, the creature landed in the mud, still transforming. It roared as its razor-sharp claws ripped through the black leather of its shoes and glinted in the weak sunlight. Tearing away what remained of its footwear with yellowing nails, the monster gave chase. The boy tripped and fell, banging his head on a gravestone. A flash of white filled his vision, and he was temporarily stunned. Forcing himself to stand, the schoolboy rubbed at the cut on his forehead. As he stared at the red liquid smeared across his fingertips, he heard a snarl. The creature was in front of him now, approaching, its eyes never leaving his own. The boy was reminded of nature shows on TV, in which lions stalked their prey. He stepped back and found himself pressed against the cold marble of an ornate headstone. He was trapped. The creature screamed as its face began to push outward, bones splintering noisily and quickly reforming, muscles tearing, then instantly knotting together as its entire head changed shape. Strands of thick fur pushed out of every pore of its skin. Then the fully formed werewolf lifted its snout to the sky and howled. "No!" shouted the schoolboy. "Please don't hurt me!" He tried to run, but the werewolf was on him in a second, lashing out with its claws. 4 crimson lines soaked into the material of the boy's torn white school shirt as he fell to the ground once again. He pushed himself backward across the muddy grass as the monster sniffed at the air, the scent of blood filling its nostrils. Baring its teeth, the wolf prepared to leap on its victim. Suddenly, a yapping sound distracted the creature. Spun to see a small chihuahua bounding around its legs and nipping at its back paws. In the distance, a voice could be heard calling out, "Fluffy, here, boy!" The monster kicked the yelping dog away and turned back to its prey. As the schoolboy screamed, the chihuahua bit the werewolf hard on the leg, then disappeared into the bushes. Roaring with rage, the wolf turned and raced after the dog. Chapter 2, The Move. Luke Watson turned the dog collar over in his hands, wiping dried blood from the name tag to reveal the word, Fluffy. The chihuahua had wriggled out of its collar and run away as the werewolf caught hold of it. A cut to the ear, the only evidence that it had been in a fight at all. Hearing a sound on the stairs, Luke stuffed the collar under his pillow and grabbed the gamepad of his computer console, resuming his battle against the evil mechanoids. "Come in," he called in response to a quiet tap on his bedroom door. His mom entered, carrying a tray of food. Luke glanced at the meal. Vegetarian again. His parents hadn't cooked him meat for almost a year now. "Got on to the next level yet?" his mom asked, putting the tray down on the desk. Luke shook his head. "I've gotten rid of the robot generals, but I need to kill the overlord before I can progress to the mothership. I've gotten rid of the robot generals, but I need to kill the overlord before I can progress to the mothership." Mrs. Watson sat down on the bed. She said nothing for a while, then softly cleared her throat. "I spoke to Stephen Black's parents. I thought Dad was going to call them. He's not back from work yet," explained his mom. Luke tried unsuccessfully to hide the irritation in his voice. "Figures." "Stephen told his parents he hurt his chest climbing over a barbed wire fence," said his mother. Luke concentrated on the game, silent. "Why him, Luke? You've got few enough friends at school as it is." "He's no friend," snapped Luke, throwing the gamepad onto the bed. "He's a bully. He stole some girl's bag on the way home from school. I was just trying to get it back for her. There was no reason for him to turn on me." "He didn't know what would happen," said his mom. "He didn't know that you would—" She sighed, leaving the sentence unfinished. "The scratches aren't deep," she said. It's going to be okay. This time. Luke studied his mom as she picked up the gamepad and did her best to fight a battalion of robots wielding laser guns. Neither of his parents had smiled for a long time, not since he had first transformed into a werewolf. "You know," he said with a grin, "you suck at this game." Mrs. Watson punched him playfully on the arm as he snatched the controls from her. "You only ever press one button at a time, but if you press a combination..." A smash came from downstairs. Luke bounded down the stairs 2 at a time and skidded to a halt. The living room and hall were full of blonde-haired men packing the family's belongings into crates and carrying furniture out of the house. Each wore a shimmering purple jumpsuit with GHOUL printed across the back. One of the men was clearing up the remains of a broken vase. Luke's dad, just home from work, was struggling to pull the pieces away from him. The man simply raised a hand and pressed it over Mr. Watson's eyes. Luke watched in terror as his dad crumpled to the floor. "Mike!" yelled Luke's mom, rushing in. She dropped to her knees beside her husband and grabbed his wrist, checking for a pulse. The blond man laid his palm over her face, and she too collapsed with a moan. Luke raced across the room, fighting to get to his parents. One of the men gripped his arm and pulled him back so that 2 of his colleagues could pass by with a large picture. They stepped over Mr. and Mrs. Watson as if they were nothing more than lumps in the carpet. Luke grabbed the shoulder of the man whose touch had knocked out his parents, spinning him around. "What have you—" The words stuck in his throat. The man's head had no features, no eyes, nose, ears, or mouth, just a smooth layer of skin. Luke glanced around the room. All the men were the same. "Who are you?" he demanded, backing away. He fell onto the sofa, kicking out, as the man pressed 3 fingertips to the side of his head. Luke suddenly became aware of a voice flooding his mind. "We are the movers," said the voice. "You are being moved." Luke stared up into the featureless face. "Why?" "You attacked a boy." "But he got away when I—" Luke stumbled over his words. "When the wolf chased the chihuahua, he won't tell anyone about me, honest." The explanation made no difference. The mover pulled his hand away and turned to pick up a framed photograph. Luke jumped to his feet and dashed after the man, stopping as he noticed that his parents had gone. "Where are they?" he shouted. "What have you done with my parents?" The sound of a zipper being closed caught his attention, and Luke dashed to the kitchen to discover another mover sealing his mom inside a purple bag. An identical bag, presumably containing his dad, lay on the table. "Let them go!" he screamed, launching himself at the faceless man and trying to unzip the bag. Luke didn't see the second mover until his hand covered Luke's face, and the world dissolved into a fizzing pool of purple light. Luke woke up in near darkness. He was laying on his bed, a dull pain throbbing behind his eyes. Groaning, he reached for the glass of water on his bedside table. A few gulps cleared his dry throat, and he sat upright. Luke froze. He was on his bed, but this wasn't his room. A large glass chandelier hung from the high ceiling above him. The walls were painted green, and the floor was a dark polished wood. A purple bag, smaller than the one in which he had seen his parents wrapped, lay over the end of the bed. The tray with his dinner on it sat beside his homework on the desk, and the game console was in its place on top of the now dark computer monitor. Luke leaned over and pressed the on switch, but the screen didn't seem to be working. He slid his hand beneath his pillow and pulled out the blood-soaked dog collar. All his stuff was here. This just wasn't his bedroom. Luke swung his legs off the bed, stuffing the dog collar into his pocket. He found his sneakers and slipped them on, then went over to the bookshelf and ran his fingers over his books to check that they were all there. They were. Luke opened the heavy door and found himself standing at the top of an ornately carved stairway. A thick black rug at his feet appeared to be moving, and it was a moment before Luke realized that he was looking at hundreds of spiders. They crawled across the landing as one, dragging tiny webbing sacks of dust and leaving behind a trail of clean red carpet. The spiders were vacuuming. Luke crossed the landing and checked inside the other rooms on the top floor of the house. His parents' room was as it should be. Their wrought iron bedstead and their bureaus all in place. 2 purple body bags lay, discarded, on the bedroom floor. The bathroom was basic, with a bare stone floor and an ancient bathtub. Gas lamps hung from the walls. Luke was reaching out to test one when he heard muffled voices. He headed downstairs and found a living room lined with dark wood paneling. The family's brightly colored sofa looked out of place in such ornate surroundings. Spiders were at work here, too, cleaning the deep pile carpet. Hearing the voices again, Luke went back out into the hallway. He pushed open a door on his right to reveal an old kitchen. His parents were sitting together at one end of a long wooden table. "Mom!" yelled Luke as he ran across the kitchen and flung his arms around her. She was shaking. "Where are we?" "We don't know," said Luke's dad. "We woke up and found ourselves on our bed in some room upstairs. We found you, but couldn't wake you up." "And we're wearing these," added Mrs. Watson, holding up her arm to reveal a bracelet, like those used for hospital patients, stamped with the number 13. Luke checked his own wrist and discovered an identical band. Someone hammered at the front door. "Stay here," said Luke. He tore the strip of paper from his wrist and dashed back out into the hallway. "Luke, no!" His mom grabbed for his arm, but he was already leaving the room. 3 figures were silhouetted against the frosted glass of the front door. Luke approached cautiously, then slid back the solid brass bolts and opened the door just enough to peer out into the cold air. "Welcome to Scream Street," boomed a voice. Luke swallowed hard. Standing on the doorstep was a family of vampires.